Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM for Wednesday, April 9th. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined in this segment by Phil Wegmann. He's our White House reporter, and Richard Porter, who's a contributor to RCP and a former RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois. Gentlemen, thanks for your time tonight. So, big news, big announcement by the Trump administration, a pause on all tariffs. They're dropping everything to 10% for the next 90 days, with one exception. And that, of course, is China, where the administration has been in a back and forth, escalating tariffs. Trump announced that he's going to add another 21%, I think it was. So now we're at 125%, and try and basically get them to the table. Phil, this was, I think, unexpected. Certainly the markets responded as if they didn't see this coming. What do you know from your sources at the White House about how this all came down?
What I can tell you is this morning, Donald Trump started by telling the country to be cool on True Social. That was his message. And then the Treasury Secretary told all of us in the White House driveway there that there was going to be the 10% across the board, but there would be a 90-day pause. And the reason why China didn't get that treatment is because they disrespected the United States. They responded with retaliatory tariffs. There's going to be a lot of he said, she said over the question of when Donald Trump actually decided to enact this pause. Yesterday, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, she told all of us that the president has a steel of spine, that no pause is in order. But then that's exactly what happened less than 24 hours later. And we heard from Donald Trump there on the South Lawn that folks were getting a little bit yippy, that they were a little bit queasy. And so that is why the pause has occurred when it has.
Richard, okay, so there's two theories, obvious theories, right? And one is that Trump just caved, right? He found himself, it was too much. There was a lot of pain coming in the markets, and he had people in his ears saying, you got to do this. In fact, this is what Bill Ackman suggested on Twitter publicly the other day, a 90-day pause, and that's effectively what happened here. The other theory is that this is Trump playing 4D chess. As Caroline Leavitt just said, this was the art of the deal. You guys all missed it. As Besson said, this is where he wanted to be all along, and he goaded China in this whole strategy, sort of was goading China into being isolated. Now they're the bad actor on the stage, and he's got them right where he wants them. What do you think the operative theory is here?
Look, I think from beginning to end, Donald Trump was negotiating with the world. And if you read his book or you've watched Donald Trump over his lifetime in the public eye, people should have seen that there was a trade coming. I mean, as I wrote in the article for RealClearPolitics, this strategy was designed to change. I mean, he put up on Liberation Day, 7 days ago, last Wednesday, he put up tariffs that were unsustainable. They were clearly unsustainable, but they had the effect of stampeding the entire world to the door of the White House, offering trade concessions that are extensive and it usually take 5 years to get, or 6 or 7 years in the course of a GATT negotiation, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which is the usual way the bureaucrats move to try to slowly improve the trade environment. But in 7 days, Trump got more done than in the 7 years of the Doha round. Okay. And then as soon as you got people coming in and they've offered up their chits, flipping it around and giving a pause so you have time to document that. And oh, by the way, leaving a 10% tariff in place that nobody's complaining about now. Nobody's complaining about a 10% across the board tariff. And he's left that in place, achieving his objective of getting revenue from tariffs, and also achieving his objective of not only isolating China, but putting a spotlight on China's unfair trade practices. So they're in the hot seat now. They're on the wrong side of a trade. And Tom, you know what comes to mind? The scene in Trading Places when Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd are down there waiting as the market moves and moves and moves. And then they said, buy. And all of a sudden the market turned on them. And oh, by the way, the president put out on Truth Social about 4 or 5 hours ago a recommendation. Now is the time to buy. So he's even kind of protected himself against, concern about market manipulation. You can say, look, I told everybody to go buy on the market. I gave them hours lead on the professional traders, who, by the way, they got burned. I mean, there was a lot of people who lost a lot of money. That one tweet that Donald Trump put out was worth $5 trillion in market value. Everybody who's in the trading business from now on will be following Donald Trump on Truth Social.
Phil, it is whether you think Trump did this because he, was feeling a lot of heat or whether it was 4D chess, it's a pretty remarkable jujitsu move. You really do have to kind of respect it. If it was a situation where he was making lemonade, he now is able to say, look, I got exactly what I wanted. The Nasdaq is up what? Nasdaq's up like 11. I think the S&P's up 7. Dow is up, I mean, huge gains in the market that, as Richard mentioned, some 5 trillion plus, at least as of we're sitting here right now recording this show. So, is he out of the woods here? Did he find a way out of this trade conundrum that had been really roiling everybody, it seemed, for the last 7 days?
Well, the president went from being at war with the world on trade to just being at war with China on trade. This is still massively significant. These are the world's two largest economies. And yet, I take Porter's point here because he did put the rest of the market on notice. They saw the tariffs that were going to be coming down the pipe on Liberation Day, when Donald Trump stands out there with the red and blue poster board. And I think that it does sort of light a fire under these other nations to try and get a deal when they can, because they're seeing what's going to happen to China. They see that war play out. One thing I can say, though, I think pretty definitively at this point, as we wait for the second round of negotiations to begin the world over, is when it comes down to it, Scott Bessent, who began all of this by saying this is a negotiation, these tariffs are temporary, he's up. He won this round. Peter Navarro, on the other hand, who said this is not a negotiation, these tariffs ought to be permanent, he seems to have fallen by the wayside. I was texting with a senior Trump administration official as this was all going down, and they told me, yeah, Bessent won. And then I asked sort of for comment, what is the feeling inside of the administration currently? They sent me an emoji of a stock market graph going up. So that's sort of the mood inside of the West Wing currently. But that's something to pay attention to, right? There were these two strands. Navarro said these tariffs were permanent and they were good in and of themselves. Bessent said that this was a high watermark and this was always going to be a negotiation, and the Treasury Secretary won out.
So, well, Richard,
go ahead. Say you need Navarro, right? I mean, to put value in those chits he put on the table. He created bargaining leverage last Wednesday when he put out those high tariffs. And then he had to need people to say, yeah, we're going to do this. And they were very high. The formula was, not theoretically sound. But what it did was it conveyed a certain, seriousness about this, and also maybe a certain sort of manic quality, which people said, I got to go deal with this guy. He's really serious. So he's able to squeeze out, more juice out of the oranges and the lemons from around the world, of getting people to come forward and offering up trade concessions in order to get out from underneath this. He kind of collects those like chits on a trading floor, says thank you very much, and then he turns off the excessive tariff, but he still has the 10% tariff in place, which is what Navarro has been in his ear about trying to get all along. So I actually think everybody played their role in this thing. And it was just, you didn't know how or when it was going to come to an end, how people would react. But the fact that Donald Trump is negotiating with the world, that's who he is. He's always cutting deals, and he does things with a hard sell, then a soft sell, a little bit of love. I mean, he's back and forth. He's not a theoretical guy. He's a pragmatic bargainer.
Phil, you mentioned China. So, I mean, this is still the second largest economy in the world next to ours. And so these are still pretty high stakes negotiations. We had Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank on CNN last night, saying he wants a 400% tariff. He wants to squeeze the Chinese heads against the wall, I think is the phrase that he used. Because he said, listen, I do business in China and they rip us off. They've been ripping us off for years, intellectual property, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, I'm sick of it. American people are sick of it. Donald Trump is sick of it. And so I want Xi on a plane to Washington tomorrow, and a 400% tariff will do that. Is that an argument you think was heard and well received within the White House. Where is this war with China going to go?
Certainly, this White House is happy to put the screws on China. Donald Trump, from 2015 until now, story of a decade, is him changing the consensus on how the United States deals with Beijing. No longer do you just have Republican hawks warning about what is happening in the CCP over there. Now, this is bipartisan. And I think that, by comparison, right, you probably don't have a lot of voters in Middletown, Ohio, or Scranton, Pennsylvania, who have gotten their minds around why the United States needs to go to war with, Madagascar over that trade imbalance. But they understand China. We lived through the pandemic. We saw what happened when the supply chains were squeezed and we couldn't get and emergency equipment. And so I think that's an easier sell for this administration. I asked the president in the Oval Office the other day if he was worried that some of our trading partners were going to end up sending their consumer goods to China and we're going to draw closer to them as a result of this. He seemed to shrug that off. And I think that was telling, because as he was shrugging that off, China was releasing statements encouraging the rest of the world to come do business with them. Right now, it's certainly not a jump ball. We're a much bigger market than the Chinese, but he has forestalled that possibility, and no one seems to be griping about the 10% tariff that has been left. When you compare it to what the previous schedule was, as we've noted a second ago.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is an amazing story that we're going to be talking about for days and weeks and probably years, but we're going to have to leave it there for tonight at least. Richard Porter, Phil Wegmann, thanks for joining me for this segment. When we come back, I'll be on with Carl Cannon and Sean Trende. We're going to talk about a couple of different subjects, including Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of the state of Texas, is going to challenge John Cornyn in the Senate primary. Stick around. We're going to be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Speaking with Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief, and Sean Trende, our senior elections analyst. Sean, a little bit of elections news that was made yesterday. Ken Paxton, the attorney general for the state of Texas, has declared that he is going to challenge sitting Senator John Cornyn in a primary. What do you make of this news, and how big of a threat is he?
I mean, we live in a universe where Christine O'Donnell upended Representative Castle, who was beloved by the people of Delaware. I mean, of course, it could happen. And it's, in a state where there's a reasonably strong MAGA base. So I don't think you write Paxton off. He's beloved by the MAGA people because he was impeached by the establishment who cares about silly things like ethics and following the law. And so for people listening on the radio, I was doing scare quotes around that. So yeah, I mean, of course he can win this. I think he puts that seat in jeopardy if he does, because Texas is basically one giant suburb, and there's a lot of suburban Republicans that are going to have a hard time swallowing him as senator. But yeah, I think he can win that primary. Put it on the in danger board for Republicans.
Carl, you agree? I mean, is this a situation where Republicans are going to shoot themselves in the foot again, perhaps in a environment where, again, we'll see where Trump is in 2026, but the map doesn't look bad for them right now, and they've got some Democrats, that are retiring, that have presented some challenges to them in places like Michigan and New Hampshire. Suddenly, Texas might be an opportunity for the Democrats.
I agree with that. I agree with what Sean said exactly. And it reminded, when I saw that news, it took me way back before you guys were covering politics to California, which had a series of primary elections won by right-wing people. And then and they had terrific general election candidates, Ed Schau, Tom Campbell, moderate Republicans who would have changed the course of the state's political history. There hasn't been a Republican senator since that time, because they elected these far right people in the primary, and then they got hammered in the general election. Now, California's a lot more liberal than Texas. If Paxton were the nominee, I think it would be a close election. But why you'd be putting a state in play that otherwise wouldn't be in play?
Yeah. Well, we're definitely going to keep an eye on this one. Sean, I want to switch gears and talk about the Associated Press. There was a ruling that came out They have sued the Trump administration over the fact that they would not refer to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America in their in their copy, and as a result, were basically barred from the White House press briefing room. What do you make of this decision, which I believe was by a Trump-appointed judge, if I was reading that correctly?
Yeah, Trevor McFadden.
Yeah,
appointed by Trump.
exactly. Basically saying that this is a violation of the First Amendment.
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds on it. I mean, on the one hand, I see the point. It's a well-reasoned decision. On the other hand, like, you ask what the limiting principle is. Like, can you keep the Thunderbolt, the magazine of the KKK, out of the White House press briefing because they're unreconstructed white supremacists? Where is the line drawn? I think we all agree that there are a limited number of seats in the White House briefing room and a limited number of questions that get asked. So where does the administration start being able to say, like, no, this is unacceptable. We aren't going to have our room filled with ideological extremists. Now, that's not what the AP was doing, in my mind. It was obviously punishing the AP, and it's kind of a play on the AP kind of accepting every invention from the English language that creeps out of a seminar in a college campus into the general lexicon uncritically. But the White House ultimately does get to choose who comes in and who comes out because it's a limited seating option.
It wasn't the White House press briefing room, though. It was the pool. And it's clear to me this judge didn't understand what a White House pool is. They explained it to him, the lawyer for the AP, but he didn't quite get it. Now, Trevor McFadden is not just Trump appointed, Tom. He's Hillsdale College. After college, he was a Fairfax County police officer. He's a member of the Federalist Society. He's one of the very few DC judges who treated the J6 defendants fairly. And so he's, this is the guy you'd want the case before if you're defending it. But he hinged on there's case law on viewpoint discrimination. Once the government starts engaging in that runs afoul of the First Amendment. That's what the case law says. But now this judge has decided who's in the White House pool. That's a narrow group of people who go with the president everywhere he goes. We used to call it body watch. We don't call it that anymore, but that's really what it is. I was in the pool once a month for 15 years. I know a lot about it. There's two things that make this decision curious to me. The first is the AP doesn't pool. The White House pool or the print pooler, you're in there, you're representing the 30 other organizations, and you write a pool report that goes to the world. AP doesn't do that. They keep it to themselves. So they're in there in the press pool kind of by the grace of the system. It was always the White House Correspondents Association decides is in the pool. But Sean's right about that. So if you can't discriminate who's in the pool, this judge's language sounded like anybody who says they want to be in the pool, if they're not, it runs afoul of the Constitution. So the Scientologists have a publication. They can be in the pool. Al Jazeera can be in the pool. I mean, and the pool is limited by space. That's why it's a pool. And so anybody there who's credentialed to cover the White House can be in the pool. It's a very confusing decision, and I don't think it's workable.
Carl, who should decide who's in the pool? Is it the White House Correspondents Association that gets to decide that, or should the White House itself and the administration get to choose?
Well, the White House Correspondents Association sort of has named the pool, but it's all with the permission, if you will, of the White House. They don't have to have a pool at all. The president could say, I don't want pool reporters, or I'll choose the pool. I mean, this viewpoint discrimination, once Trump said it was because of the Gulf of Mexico thing, he crossed a line that he couldn't have known he was crossing. But because those are the magic words in viewpoint discrimination in First Amendment law in these kind of cases. But obviously someone has to make the decision. It can't, and if this federal judge, Trevor McFadden, if his rule held, well, then anybody could go in that pool any day. Now, RealClearPolitics is in the pool rotation. But why should we have to go there once a month? Maybe we want to go there every day. We'll just go up there and say, we're in. Well, okay, but it's not viewpoint discrimination.
Bill Wegmann's gonna wear out his welcome.
And Sean's point, this is the key thing. Any extremist could say they need to be in the pool, The KKK, I don't know if they still do, Sean. Remember they used to have, what was it called? The Spotlight. They used to have a newspaper, the white
Yeah, I thought it was
supremacist.
the Thunderbolt, but
Okay, was it? Okay.
not that I was ever a subscriber.
No, no, me
but
either.
but
Willis Carto had some publication, so they can be in the pool according to this judge's ruling. So I don't. This is not the ideal situation. What's that old phrase, Sean? In law, bad facts make bad law.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, we got just a couple of minutes left, and I do want to get your reactions to this other story involving the AP, which was that, well, in the press in general, that the New York Times wrote that actually a couple of their reporters had sent emails to the Trump administration, including the White House press secretary's office, asking questions. And because they had pronouns in their signature lines, he, she, or he, him, and she, her, the administration responded that they will not answer questions to people who have those pronouns in their line because they show basically an ideological bent that is in their estimation denies reality, and therefore they're not objective reporters and can't produce objective stories. Sean, what's your reaction to this, real quickly?
I mean, the pronouns in bio it's another one of those things. It's probably 70-30 for the White House. But with this ruling that you can't be excluded from the White House press pool because of the Gulf of America, why not apply to this? But again, it's kind of where you see the ridiculousness of this ruling. Like, so now do you have to actually respond to emails? Is it enough to just send a blow-off email, because of it? But regardless, I think the only people who care about pronouns and bios are people who are already like either strongly pro-Trump or are, strongly hate him. So we'll see where it goes.
Carl, you've been a reporter for, I don't know, 40, 50 years now. It's been a long time. What's your take on the reaction of this administration to the press?
Well, they wanted to make an issue of it, but they went on this sort of, and you're denying science, so why would I, talk to a reporter who's so dumb, they can't even, you couldn't be a good reporter. That's not quite right. What they really mean is this: if you put pronouns in your signature, you're advertising yourself in their minds as a progressive Democrat. And who's on one side on the culture wars and sort of in the fringe, and you're volunteering just by your email that you have antipathy, that you're hostile to Trump or not sympathetic to the Trump administration or its goals. And I think that's a stretch. I think some of these people put this in the pronouns because they work in organizations where that's considered cool or even expected. And I don't think they should have made an issue about this. But once they have, as Sean points out, the polling seems to be in their favor. But I think this was sort of, they think putting pronouns is grandstanding. I think their reaction to it was also grandstanding.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I did get a chuckle out of the New York Times write-up of this because it said, it decried an attempt to normalize the concept there are more than two biological genders, male and female. And they put quotes, scientific realities. Apparently that's not a scientific reality to the New York Times and folks who put that in their bio. Anyway, just my 2 cents. All right, we are going to leave it there for now. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, speaking with Carl Cannon and Sean Trende. And don't go away. When we get back, Carl is going to speak to Salena Zito about a piece that she wrote in the Washington Post. She visited a steel mill in Pennsylvania. You won't want to miss this. Stick around.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, talking now with one of my favorite reporters, Salena Zito, who writes Pittsburgh, she writes for us, she writes for the Washington Post. She's pretty much the person who owns Pennsylvania's political reporting, especially Western Pennsylvania. Salena, you went to a steel mill, and a steel mill owned by U.S. Steel that is at the crucible of everything that's going on now with President Trump's economic policies, with international global trade. This is the plant, the U.S. Steel plant. I'm going to set this up for our listeners and viewers, that Nippon Steel announced in a stunning announcement while President Biden was still in office, that they had made this offer and had been accepted to buy U.S. Steel, and people flipped out. But you went there to do you did what people don't do anymore. You did reporting. You went there and you talked to the management, you talked to workers, and what you found was a much more nuanced story than I think anybody would have expected. Were you yourself surprised?
Well, I mean, I covered these guys. I knew sentiments had shifted from when the announcement was first made. And I've been to the Irvin plant. To set this up, the Irvin plant sits on a hill or a mountain, I would call it a mountain, that overlooks the Monongahela River. It is just a tour de force. It is just this massive plant. It's 86 years old. The rolling mill inside is also 86 years old. And for 3 decades, I've been trying to get into that plant. And I finally broke them down and annoyed them enough that they let me come in. And honestly, it was one of the most unique experiences of my entire journalistic career, to be able to cover something that has been very, very much at the heart of Western Pennsylvania and the identity of the working class. And so, I go inside, hard hat. I mean, the sound is just this big hum. It sounds and smells and feels like work. That's the best way to describe it. And there's men and there's women there. And people think of like hard labor work. Yes, there's definitely part of that. But also part of that is a lot of technology, right? To make things precise, to keep them competitive. But the mill is 86 years old, and they can't, obviously they're not putting duct tape on it. It would melt off. It's 3,000 degrees, but they put, you can't keep this mill going much longer.
All right. So U.S. Steel doesn't think it has the money to modernize it, but Nippon Steel thinks it does, and has promised to put $1 billion into the plant to retrofit it and make it a modern steel plant.
Yeah, they have actually upped that offer to $7 billion.
Wow. So, all right. So I guess it begs 2 questions. I mean, but first of all, let's set the scene, because you and I have been reporting long enough. Japan used to be the boogeyman. Japan, Japanese cars, Japanese semiconductors, Japanese steel. They were this great existential threat to the American way of life. This is when Jimmy Carter was president, Ronald Reagan was president, and into the Bush years. And people did things like protectionist Democrats would on Capitol Hill smash Toshiba's or computers. Remember this? But now, the world's changed. Russia is still what it's always been all my life, a geopolitical threat, and the war in Ukraine has brought that home. China is now the bogeyman. China is the emerging power, the real threat to America. At least that's how it's perceived. And so I guess Japan now is our friend. I guess, we fought with the Russians and the Chinese against Japan in World War II, but those days are long gone. Now what people think is that Japan is our ally, and if Japan wants to help make this plant a going concern, we all ought to be behind it.
Yeah, so the initial reaction from the union guys I sat down and talked to, but also management, was, and that in itself was very interesting to sit down with both. But the initial reaction was no. Japan was the bad guy, not only in dumping steel, but also, this is a multi-generational industry. So their dads and their granddads were fought in World War II. So there was just this completely different sentiment about Japan. However, after they started going over the deal, after U.S. Steel was blunt to say, yeah, you know what, we're not going to upgrade this. We'll go down to Arkansas or Alabama. This is over. The Mon Valley is over. Which is where the Clairton, the Braddock, and the Irvin works all sit within 9 miles of each other. And they started to see this in a very different way. And it took a few months of talking with Nippon, of talking with U.S. Steel, for them to understand. Now, what's really interesting is that the international is all for it. Now the international president lives in Cleveland, and he
You're talking about the international union here. Yeah.
the
that's right.
international union.
Yeah.
The
yeah.
local union has broken away from it,
Mhm.
from them on this. That's the other, sort of part of it.
What's the local union? What's the sentiment among the local? Are they warming to the idea though? Your story
They're
makes me
all
sound.
in,
Yeah.
all
Okay.
in,
All right.
completely all in.
Well, I
different
was down in Alabama, and they've got in the Birmingham used to be well, it wasn't a rival to Pittsburgh, but it was a very important steel manufacturing sector in the United States for a long time. It's not anymore. Most of those plants lie idle. Whoever's going to, if ever talking about moving jobs to Alabama, is going to have to rebuild or even construct plants there. But it's the workforce. They think they can, I guess they think they can have a non-union workforce or a cheaper workforce in Alabama.
Yeah, they think they can.
yeah.
They're Arkansas. I can't remember which state it was.
Yeah.
But they think they can have a non-union cheaper, and they don't have this. It will cost $1 billion alone to rebuild this rolling mill. They're not going to invest in it.
Yeah.
Now
right.
you.
So back to what you were saying. So the local people, the people who work in that plant, unionized plant, Western Pennsylvania, working class. I mean, I would, politically, mostly probably what you and I would call Reagan Democrats to this day. Their first reaction is shock and horror. Then the second thing is, well, maybe they want to upgrade the plant. They want to keep my job. They want to keep steel an important part of the Western Pennsylvania economy. Maybe I'll think about it. And they thought about it, and now you say they're all in.
They're all in. They're absolutely all in. And so is the communities around them, the mayors, the state senators, the state reps, the state, well, not the US House. I'm not quite sure what Summerlee thinks. But they are definitely all in. And they believe, while both Biden and Trump were against it. And which, by the way, I talked to John Anzalone, who was Biden's pollster forever. And he tells me they were just flabbergasted that Biden wouldn't do this. And because everyone in the Biden administration was for it. And they just could not get him to move on this. Now Trump is
maybe
more
Biden was just too old school. He's born during World War II. Maybe he just couldn't get his mind around it. You're listening to Salena Zito, excellent reporter from Western Pennsylvania, and she's in the Pittsburgh. You probably tell from her accent if you know American linguists. She's from Pittsburgh. She wrote an excellent piece in the Washington Post about visiting the steel mill, U.S. steel mill that Nippon Steel is saying they're taking over. And all right, so that brings me to now. So Donald Trump initially didn't sound supportive of it. Where is the Trump administration on this right now?
Right now, they are in furious discussions with Nippon, with Japan, with U.S. Steel, and with the local steel workers.
Doesn't this fit Trump? Trump's always telling people to come to America and invest. Isn't this just right in his wheelhouse?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would be shocked if this deal doesn't get done. He did that press conference with the Prime Minister of Japan in February. Pretty much put the guy on the spot and said, we're gonna make you guys invest. And the look on his face was like, well, I didn't see that coming. But look, Japan wants in our market desperately. Nippon desperately wants in our market. The tariffs are going to absolutely crumble them. He has the upper hand, meaning Trump. He has the upper hand in this. And while, and it's very interesting to me to watch these two different worlds that I straddle. Because if you talk to manufacturers, if you talk to cattle ranchers, if you talk to farmers, if you talk to steel workers, if you talk to energy workers, they're all in for the tariffs. They're in completely, even if they take a hit on their 401k. Their attitude is, well, I took one in 2008 and 2020, and I'm doing okay. It'll come back. This levels the playing field. And the one guy said to me, the manager of the plant, he said, where was all the grief and people being upset when this industry just got shipped off to Mexico, shipped off to Canada, shipped off to Japan and China. There wasn't one. And
All right, we got 1 minute left. Look into your crystal ball and tell me, if this deal goes through, how does it affect the politics of Pennsylvania?
it shifts the electorate even more red. The working class has already moved to the right. We saw that in this election. It's white working class, Hispanic working class, Black working class. If it's not just divided by race. And
so you think if this, so we've come full circle, you and I,
Yes,
in our
we
reporting
have.
career. So if Japan if a Japanese company is allowed to take over U.S. Steel, that helps Republicans.
It does help over Republicans, although I still think it'll be a deal. I still think it'll be the U.S. Steel name, right? I still
It's
think
one of the most iconic names in American industry.
it's the first billion-dollar company in the world, once the largest company in the world.
Well, you've been listening to Salena Zito. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. And we'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder, president of RCP, joined now by John Kass, the
Hello.
great columnist and proprietor of the website johnkassnews.com. He writes, I don't know, how many you write in a week, John? 3 still?
I write 2 a week.
2 a week.
I used to write 4. Now I write 2. Sometimes
and then you have
3.
guest columnists.
And I have guest columns. I'm waiting for Tom Bevan to send one over.
I promised that a long time ago.
That's all right. I'm not.
Anyway, John, we often carry your stuff on Real Clear Politics, and we carried your story this morning, your column.
What was it about again?
Wall Street panicans and
Right.
Democrat fearmongers. Tell our listeners what a panican is.
Well, a panican is taken from President Trump's Truth Social post condemning the Wall Street types, Jamie Dimon and those guys, and calling them panicans because they're panicking. I think the people of our government and the Democrats owe not only short term, they owe our kids, because you and I are fathers, and I don't want the national debt to break the country's back when my kids are becoming of age. I want them to have a life, to be able to buy a house, to have economic opportunity. I'm not saying that it should be guaranteed, but $36 trillion, the way we're spending it, no, it's not going to work.
And so, you mentioned Bill Ackman, and in the piece, he was one of the most prominent folks who came out and said, listen, he called for a 90-day pause on tariffs while things get worked out. And guess what happened, John?
Besides the fact that I condemned him as a coward? Yes. What happened, Tom?
Trump announced a 90-day pause on tariffs on everybody except for China, who he slapped with an additional 21%. So we're now up to 125% on China. But everybody else, he said, by virtue of the fact that they had more than 75 countries reach out to them wanting to do deals and work on, basically recalibrating trade, not just tariffs, but the, non-tariff barriers that a lot of the Trump administration have been talking about, and the fact that they didn't retaliate, which is one of the things that Trump sort of laid out initially. He said, look, we're doing this, and don't think about retaliating. I think China was one of the only ones, if not the only one, who retaliated. And so we're in a bit of a spat with them. But is this a sign that Trump was feeling too much pressure, or do you think this is a practical move?
Anytime we praise politicians for their ramrod straight posture and their spine of steel, we have to realize that they're just men, and they might bend a little bit. And obviously, or clearly, according to how I read it, Trump bent a little bit. He was supple. He gave in a little bit.
Well, is that really, do you know that to be true? I mean, nothing's really been negotiated yet, so we'll see. If he gets everything he wants from all these countries, and if he eventually gets what he wants from China, he will have not really bent at all.
But what is this about? Are the tariffs about raising revenue to knock down the debt, or are tariffs about pushing manufacturing in the United States? And you said in one of the podcasts recently, it could be both. But can it be both?
Are you questioning my judgment, John Kass? Is that what you're doing here?
No, I'm not. I'm just
just kidding.
just like we used to back in the day, it's to kick ideas around.
Well, look, I do think they have given different rationales at different times for what they're trying to do.
Right.
And I definitely think that, they're very concerned and looking to reduce the deficit. And that's part of DOGE. That's part of what this administration, despite the fact that, Trump wasn't terribly concerned with the deficit his first term. It wasn't something that he focused on. It seems to be, not that he's maybe come to the idea lately, but more broadly speaking, he's trying to reorient the entire global economy in America, sort of rebalance it to what he sees as a fair situation for America after being, ripped off for decades by everybody around the globe, including and most notably China.
My sons are in their 20s. One is a teacher, the other is a union electrician. And they're both concerned about their future. They're like, Dad, I don't know if I could buy a house. Dad, I don't know, can I get married? Stuff like that.
Yep.
Things that you and I never even questioned.
Yeah.
There was never a question for us. This generation has been subject to constant whipsawing and battering. It's not a good thing.
Do both your kids live in Chicago, John?
The boys live in the Chicago area, yeah.
Okay.
And so do I, in the suburbs of Chicago.
Yes, I'm aware.
Far southwest, northwest Indiana.
So far southwest, it's not even in Illinois anymore.
The better to get away from Governor Pritzker, because if I see another press conference where he's congratulating himself on the health of Illinois, I just keep seeing him in a Speedo, and I don't want to see it.
But that was my question though. Like, do your kids, how much of their, I'm sure folks, boys in that, young men in particular, but young women also all across the country. It doesn't matter if you're probably in a red state or a blue state. The macro idea is, look, things are expensive, but I just wonder if it's more acute because they live in Chicago, which is, look, the city's not doing well. I mean, the state, people are leaving the state in droves, including their father. And so, have they thought about, is that one of the options on the table for them?
Well, the options now are not, because Spiro's, like I said, a union electrician, and Local 9 is union, and they're pretty strong in Illinois. And Peter is a teacher. They have a great pension, even though the security is not so good. And it's just a very unsettling time for them.
But there are teachers in
Indiana. Yes.
In other states as well,
I keep telling them that.
Yeah. But I do think, look, it speaks to the larger piece of this as we talk about tariffs and trade.
Yes.
And, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, went before the I think it was the American Bankers Association, where he said, listen, I've been on Wall Street and for 4 decades, the system was basically rigged to make Wall Street rich. And for the next 4 years, at least, we're going to be focused on Main Street and trying to, re-engineer the system to make it more beneficial for working class folks. I thought that was a very effective message. And I think Bessent is actually, despite the fact he's an elite guy. I mean, he did spend, he's a very rich guy, spent a lot of time on Wall Street. He seemed to be a pretty good messenger delivering that, in part because he knows these people when he talks to these audience, but in part because I think he's just focused on the right things, at least as far as the Trump administration goes. What do you think?
100%. And as you were kind enough to run this piece that I wrote today, it mentions that I was a young college intern, and I work at the Daily Calumet. I'm an intern. I'm the political writer and the steel writer. And in one day, I was given a full-time job covering both beats. Same week, Wisconsin Steel had already closed. Southworks, U.S. Steel Southworks shut down. There's 45,000 men out of work. And then 18,000 a few miles away are out of work at Republic Steel. And it went on and on. And all the platitudes that I hear the Democrats make about the working man, like they really care, I saw it firsthand. They didn't seem that they cared. And these people were knocked to the ground. The elites didn't care because they were stepping over them to make profits in China. The Democrats didn't care because they were in a transitional period where they were about abandoning the working class and moving on to other, Southern migrants from across the border. And those people were left behind. And
the Republicans weren't there for them either at that point.
No, Reagan could have done more. Reagan could have actually done a little bit harsher or more draconian measures than Trump, but he didn't. And I wanted him to. I was a Reagan guy. I wanted him to do it, but he wouldn't.
All right, John, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, believe it or not. I feel like we just got started. So we're going to have you back soon. Write some more columns. We'll keep putting them on the website and we'll have you back. And I promise, I will write something for you one of these days.
I expect you to fulfill your promise. I just hope that the next time I write something about how the Wall Street guys are cowards and President Trump is standing resolute, that he doesn't flip on me right after I post it. Okay.
Right.
But such is the news business, right?
All right. John Kass, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. And that's going to do it for us. On behalf of Carl and Sean, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RealClearPolitics. You've been listening to RealClearPolitics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a good night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.